Guten Abend, ganz herzlich willkommen zu unserem heutigen Anlass Treffpunkt Gestaltung im Handwerk in der Baumuster-Zentrale. 1- bis 2-mal pro Jahr dürfen wir hier in der Baumuster-Zentrale das Haus der Farbe begrüßen. Sie bringen jeweils ein Thema zu Farbigkeit, zur Geschichte und zu Handwerk zu uns. Ganz herzlichen Dank, dass ihr immer wieder diese tollen und schönen Projekte für uns heraussucht. Und auch bedanken möchte ich mich bei den beiden Sponsoren für den heutigen Abend. Das ist der Sponsor, der Reihensponsor, die Firma Schlagenhauf, das große Gipser- und Malerunternehmen aus dem Raum Zürichsee. Und heute speziell mit dabei die Firma Forbo. Das kommt nicht von ungefähr. Der Linoleum von Forbo spielt beim heutigen Anlass eine ganz zentrale Rolle. Das Thema des Anlasses, das wird Ihnen gleich die Leiterin des Hauses der Farbe vorstellen. Bitte begrüßen Sie ganz herzlich Steffi Wettstein.
Ja, guten Abend und auch unsererseits herzlichen Dank an die Baumuster-Zentrale, an Stefan und sein Team. Es ist extrem lässig, mit euch zu arbeiten, unkompliziert und schnell. Und das schätzen wir besonders, weil wir auch so funktionieren. Mit Holland verbindet uns eine lange Freundschaft und die geht eigentlich via Farbe. Wir sind hier in der Schweiz sicher so herausragend spezialisiert für Farbe. Und in Holland gibt es eine Person von der Denkmalpflege, die ist ebenfalls spezialisiert auf Farbe. Ich weiß nirgends in der Welt, wo es das gibt. Das ist Mariël Polman. Und so haben wir uns gefunden. Aber jetzt immer mehr verbindet uns noch viel mehr, nämlich das Handwerk, die Gestaltung im Allgemeinen. Und das sind die Themen, die wir leidenschaftlich um die wir uns leidenschaftlich drehen, tagtäglich. Und Santje Pander und Mariël Polman, die heute da sind, oder die schon zum Glück die ganze Woche da sind, die tun genau dasselbe. Und so, ich bin extrem glücklich, dass ihr da seid, ihr beiden, und dass ihr uns dieses schöne Projekt vorstellt. Und ich bin auch froh, dass Sie alle da sind und wünsche Ihnen einen ganz schönen Abend. Merci vielmals.
Good evening. We would like to thank Haus der Farbe and the Schweizer Baumuster-Centrale Zürich that we are invited to be here and to talk about our projects. We will speak English and we hope this is okay for you, and if there are any questions, please let us know. Oh, yeah. The main theme of this evening will be linoleum. Conservation and reconstruction of interiors by the architect Gerrit Rietveld. Like Steffi said, Santje Pander will be the speaker, and I'm in fact just introducing her. Santje Pander studied conservation of historic interiors and architectural paint research, and she did her master thesis on the floors, the linoleum floors of the press room of the UNESCO-Hauptquartiers in Paris, designed by Gerrit Rietveld. The room isn't existing anymore, at least not the linoleum. After her master thesis, she got a grant to make a 4D model, which she will explain. And then she was commissioned to do the conservation of the tables with linoleum of the same room. In the meantime, I was commissioned to do architectural paint research of the Art Academy, the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, also by Rietveld. And not only paint is an important aspect of the colors, but also linoleum. So, of course, I asked Santje to join the project. So I did the architectural paint research on the paint layers, and Santje did the linoleum research. This was for Keep It Grounded, Keep It Modern, a grant from the Getty Institute. Now, one thing about architectural paint research, that you never do it alone. You always do it with a large team of all kind of disciplines, and that's what happened with these projects as well. So we are just two of the many who cooperated on this, and we would like to thank all these people very much, and to give them space here in attention in this talk. The two projects both were designed by Gerrit Rietveld, cabinet maker, furniture designer, and architect. Born in Utrecht, started with a furniture workshop and member of the style movement. And hopefully you know him from that, but I'm quite sure you know his iconic house, the Schreuderhuis, the Rietveld Schreuderhuis nowadays in Utrecht, which is really an icon of architecture of the style movement. And of course, the red and blue chair. Unlike Mondrian, who kept working on the primary colors and black, gray, and white in lines and planes, Rietveld didn't continue all the time to work in the primary colors and gray, white, and black. But after the Second World War, there was a revival in the late 50s and 60s of the style movement again. And he joined it. And that will be one of the themes, of the central themes of this evening. In 1985, he made the press room of the UNESCO-Hauptquartiers in Paris. In 1964, he died, and after that, there was the opening of the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. But because he also designed the academy in Arnheim, he was really the one who did the design, and so all the things we found were really his ideas. Now, like I said, I did the architectural paint research, and you see something of this research concerning the furniture of the press room. But this won't be the theme of this evening, because the interesting thing is we knew exactly what colors were used, because we knew the color codes. And we knew exactly which linoleums were used, because we knew the linoleum codes. But again, this is the interesting thing of the reconstruction after the Second World War. Suddenly, architectural paint research is not only the analysis of pigments, but it shows a complete new view on color in architecture. For example, in the linoleum news and the color van and the Visie, it's a magazine of Forbo and Sickens, and it's clear that it was not just an industry, that the industry worked together with the artists and with the architects. And when we read the newsletters, we found the same text as when we read the text from Rietveld, more or less. Going to Rietveld, for him it was important, and I quote, to arrive at the elements of seeing. The style divided seeing into different qualities: color, red, yellow, and blue; form, convex, flat, and concave. Space, inside, outside, in between. Moreover, space has 3 dimensions: length, width, height. For the sake of comparability, we use just rectangular shapes, which are mutually equivalent, and only the primary colors. Now, this text is about the style, but he writes exactly the same when he talks about light. And this is typically Rietveld. He goes to the very elements of color, form, and space. And as Santje will show you, we can recognize in all details. And for example, the color fan van Sikkens, it was made by the colorists of Sikkens in cooperation with Liga Nieuw Beelden, with the artist of Liga Nieuw Beelden. Well, I'm finished and I'm glad to give the word to Santje.
Whoa, it's very loud. Yeah, okay. Hi to you all. So here you can see 2 of the projects. So the press room, designed by Rietveld in 1958. Over here, oh, I have a pointer. And this one is the Rietveld Academy, and it was inaugurated in 1967. So both projects are very much related in both color and material use. And also in both projects we saw that when looking at, for both projects also both the color codes of the paint layers and also of the linoleum, they were both known. And when returning to the archives, we really saw that there was this direct relation between the architect and the industry. But the projects are so related in color and material use, but so different in conservation and restoration. So this was what I focused on the flooring, Mariël on the painted surfaces, researching the painted surfaces. And I will, explain about the research into the linoleum flooring, the conservation, the research we did. And sometimes I will also talk about paint as well, because, it's a complete ensemble. So this, I cannot not mention. Here you can see again the press room. So first we start with the press room. So on the left here, this was the press room when it was inaugurated in 1958. And here you can see all the colors and materials, how they were applied on the floor, on the tables, the same pattern that continued throughout the room, and all these different colors in the interior. Unfortunately, this interior does not exist anymore. So in the 1980s, the room was dismantled, the furniture was taken out and brought to the Agency of Cultural Heritage, where it is now stored. So before I started with the project, the furniture looked like this, furniture without an interior. But this floor, as you can see, was a really important part of the interior. So when the Agency of Cultural Heritage wants to reconstruct this room and make a reinstallation in a museum, but then it's so important to have this floor as well. But how to reconstruct this floor and how to restore the remaining linoleum that is still on the furniture was still the question. And to answer these questions, we first have to go back to the design. It was the building it was originally designed for. It is a building, it was built for the UNESCO-Hauptquartiers in Paris, a building by Marcel Breuer, Pierre Luigi Nervi, Bernard Servoux, and all member states of UNESCO contributed to this building with artworks and interiors. Rietveld has selected from the Netherlands to give this interior to UNESCO. But Rietveld was not very happy in the beginning with this room because it was in the basement of Bâtiment 2, so over here between the main building and the conference building, and it had a strange form, and over here there was a corner, and it was really large, 12 by 20.5 meters, and there was not much sunlight coming in. It was irregularly shaped. So in a lecture, he expresses himself about this room, and he says, a room that was more of a random leftover in the basement of a connecting hall between the Congress building and the administration, then a form of a press room. There were irregularly placed columns, placed for the higher levels. Those were very obstructive for the placement of the tables, for the chairs, desks, phones, and translation machines, etc. To give such an interior a face of a pleasant workplace, there was, next to a good form and placement of installations, some kind of juggling with colors and lines needed. And when you look at the interior, he indeed played with colors and lines, and in this way he succeeded to create this coherent ensemble that can be seen more as a piece of art than as just an interior. So on these pictures, you can see that, he used for the interior, he used 3 different types of interior finishes. The first material is sous vide. It was applied on the chairs and also on the walls. Here you can see some fragments that are nowadays in the archive. They were sent to him when he designed the room. And you can see that there is a whitish, a light gray, a light blue, a greenish blue for the walls, a yellow, red, and anthracite. And sous vide was really a new material back then. It was a vinyl material which is slightly structured, applied on a canvas backing. And in the furniture, for the furniture, he created these volumes over here with applying it, covering it completely. And here he made these vertical planes in the room. And then the next material is the painted surfaces, so the paint, which is applied on the furniture in different shades of gray, white, and yellow, creating again these large vertical planes. And here, for example, this is a cabinet. And then the final material is linoleum. Quickly said, linoleum consists of linseed oil, together mixed with resins, gum, fillers. So it's a quite natural material because the fillers are wood flour, calcium carbonate, and then the pigments are added. Linoleum was already known as a material that was easy to clean, sound reducing, so perfect for in this room. But suddenly so perfect for in this room, and he could also make these large planes with it, which structured the room. So on an archival note, Rietveld wrote, the floor and tables are all covered with linoleum in 2 colors of gray, with triangles in red, yellow, blue, and green. This has a very colorful effect because the horizontal planes of the tables and floor will form a unity, and because the lines will accentuate the systematical placement of the tables. So on one hand, you have these large colored horizontal planes on the floor. here. And when you look from above, you wouldn't see the tabletops anymore because they have exactly the same pattern. And in this way, he structured the room and made this clear grid. And he also balanced with these linoleum planes the lightness in the room, because here there was some sunlight coming in, we found out later. There was sunlight coming in, and the larger planes here, they are in a darker gray linoleum, and here in this much darker corner, the large planes are more whitish gray. And next to that, next to the large planes, he also created these volumes with the linoleum that was completely covering the tables. On archival notes, people from the press room also described the tables as concrete tables, but yeah, the linoleum was actually applied just on wood, and yeah, compared to with concrete, they're quite light. So yeah, we do have the tables still, but what the floor exactly looked like, we do not have really good images of, because we found out that these images were actually quite misleading, since over here the planes are depicted in a greenish color, and on the other side here it's bluish and grayish, so it's very confusing. But the original factory of linoleum does still exist. It was originally produced by the NV Nederlandse Linoleumfabriek Krommenie, which still exists. Nowadays it's called Forbo Flooring, which is still based in the Netherlands, in Krommenie. There they have this huge factory still and a factory archive, but the headquarters are in Switzerland now. And it has this incredible small factory archive that was a really important source in this research. Because on the floor plans there were actually written down these numbers that refer to the historic catalogs that were still in the archive of the factory. So it was really important that this factory still had this. And next to this, when a linoleum batch is produced, each time there's one piece of linoleum is kept aside and it's stored in boxes. And also, yeah, and this is a completely finished product with coating. And assumingly, because we found these again in the archive, the original colors of these reference samples. And they assumingly give a reliable impression of the 1958 colors, because they were never used and have always been stored in the dark. Here you can see the colors. You can see that there were used 3 gray tones in the press room. So here in marmoleum, which is the marbled kind of linoleum, so a mid-gray and a really whitish light gray, and a somewhat darker gray in Walton, which is a monochrome linoleum. Then we have the 3 primary colors and green. And when I looked at it, for example, yeah, you have this really grayish blue, and this one, the green of the yellow is a little bit greenish, and here this one, the green, when it didn't fit to my contemporary idea of what's a green, so it was, in my opinion, way too blue, and I almost mistaken it for a blue. But when you put it all together, it really becomes a balanced harmony, and it really works well together. And yeah, so it creates this calm color harmony, which is also a description that was used in the magazines that were produced in 1958 to tell about this new collection, because these colors were just available in 1958. And traditionally, Linoleum is actually a quite brownish product because of the materials that are used in it. So it's based, as I told you, on linseed oil and resin. So it makes it quite a brownish material. So it needed quite strong pigments to make this into brighter colors. So here you can see linoleum without any colors on it and no backing, but just a linoleum material. But since the 1930s, it was already possible to produce better synthetic pigments to create these brighter colors, like, for example, titanium white. But it was only until the architect, interior architect Klim Meijer was appointed as a new colorist at Linoleum Krommenie, that this completely new, refreshing collection of linoleum was created, which was actually completely based on the heritage of the style movement, which Mariël described. And yeah, this collection, it had a range of grays, bright primary colors, and also, for example, in the magazines, when they talked about it, light reflection was noted. So all things that relate back to the heritage of the style movement. And the same happened also for the paint industry. New colorists were appointed to design new ranges of colors. And Rietveld wrote about the press room and the new collection in Visie, which is a magazine that was again produced by all the producers of the materials together. So the factory of Suède, Hatema, Linoleum, so Linoleum Krommenie, and Sikkens from the paint industry. And Rietveld wrote, linoleum used to have the disadvantage that the colors were based on a beige ground color. However, the new color samples offered a change. Suddenly, I saw the possibility of achieving the desired results. So it can be argued that these bright colors that were so important to Rietveld should be reconstructed on the floor as well. But on the other hand, we still had the linoleum that was applied on the furniture as well, which was slightly discolored because of pollution and also discoloration because of exposure to sunlight. But when you would recreate this option, it was quite much darker. When you would recreate it, reconstruct it on the floor as well, then there would be this unity between the furniture and the floor again. But to reproduce these two options, it is quite expensive because yeah, there has to be just one batch produced for this interior only. So another option is just to select a selection from the contemporary collection of linoleum that is nowadays available. But in the original press room, it was much larger than just these samples. It was really difficult to make a good decision based on just samples because the planes, the colored planes, they were much lighter. The glossiness of the material is completely different. Also, when the light is falling in the original lighting. So what happens with the color harmony in the press room was not clear. And it was not easy to answer without good visualization. So therefore I signed up for the 4D Research Lab Award of the University of Amsterdam, and this project was selected, which made it possible to simulate colors and materials in a 3D visualization in collaboration with Tijm Lanjouw from the 4D Research Lab of the University of Amsterdam. And to simulate the colors and materials in a digital model, we had to look very precisely at the materials. So what is the gloss of modern linoleum? What's the gloss of the historic linoleum? And have what is actually gloss. It's actually surface roughness, so you have to look very closely to the surface. Also, if there are like irregulations, is there an irregular pattern on the surface? And we looked at it under different light sources, and next to that we also did color measurements, various color measurements, and these results were all implemented in the 3D model, in which again all the archival material, the results from what we found at UNESCO, photographs, all could be compared in this model as well. And it could be, yeah, the research could be really, all the material could be really structured in this model as well. So it worked more like an experiment in which you can relate all these, a virtual laboratory actually, in which you can relate all the different sources. And it really resulted in some new findings, like here, for example, this is a render of the 3D model. And even kijken hoor. Yeah, because when you look at the original light setting, so everything could be adjusted in this model, like for example, also the placement of the sun. And we really realized that we had been looking, for example, at pictures that were probably taken in the evening before, but that actually the sun entered in the press room. So, for example, this was the situation at the 15th of May in 1962. So the only thing we don't know if it was a cloudy day or not. Yeah, so here you can see two of the different renders, so in which we could compare all the reconstruction options. So here, this is the head linoleum from 1958 on the floor, and here the modern linoleum, and we really became aware of the effect of what glass does to the interior. So it's still a project that is still developing, but these were already two things that we should keep in mind when you're actually reinstalling and reconstructing a floor for the press room. Yeah. Oh yeah, can we, yes, hey. Yeah, because with this 3D model, you can also finally re-experience this room again in a way that was not possible before. And one thing that became really clear during this project is that everything interacts in the interior. So the materials, the painted surfaces, linoleum, their colors, their structures, their gloss. And as the room is designed as an ensemble, the room should be analyzed as such as well. So therefore it is the intention to continue with this 3D model and to incorporate all the other material finishes with their color and their gloss into the model as well. And we already have made a start with this to incorporate all the some of the results from other researchers as well into a model that can be visited online, but it's all open source, so I have the link at the end of the presentation as well. And for the physical remains of the press room, they asked for a completely different restoration approach, actually, because the interior was completely adjusted to the space it was made for. As I told at the beginning, it was made for the original function it was made for. So people worked there. Here, you can see them working. There were flowers here standing in the room. There were a lot of ashtrays because people were smoking a lot in this room. And you can still see this, this history of the room in all the signs of use that are still visible on the linoleum surface, like for example these texts here that were an old employee of the press room told that at the beginning of the day they wrote down who was working where with chalk, but this time apparently with a marker. So it's still on the table, and it was actually a place where people could work everywhere. So it was like flexplekken, we say in the Netherlands. Yeah, during the restoration, it was attempted to remove all the signs of all the pollution from after the 1980s and keep all the signs of use from the period during use. Because after the 1980s, the furniture was literally dragged out of the room, and you can see these long lines of pollution, and then afterwards it was also stored for 40 years in the depot. Yeah, so here you can see, well, not so well actually, but some lines of dragging the tables over the floor, and this is the result after cleaning the tables. In which these signs, for example, here a large imprint of a face that was vase that was standing there, probably with flowers in the middle of the table, or here just a small imprint in the pollution, the surface dirt that is still on the surface, with a imprint of a cup. And here you can see a burn from cigarettes and pen stripes. But on the other hand, after cleaning the planes, they were noticeable again, and these straight lines that were so important in the design by Rietveld. All right, so then up to a completely different project on floor finishes, the Rietveld Academy, so the Art Academy in Amsterdam. Because, yeah, this building, it still exists. You can see it here, and it even has its original function. And here you can see a picture from the front with its curtain facade and a floor plan of the ground floor. And Rietveld was already commissioned for this building in 1950, but it was a very lengthy and difficult process due to finding a suitable location and finances. And the building had just begun in 1964 when Rietveld passed away, and in 1967 the building was inaugurated. And it was designed as a really transparent building with flexible walls, adaptable to the wishes of the education, and with grey as a neutral background for the students. The largest color planes in the building are the floors. But a completely different project in conservation. Here again you can see the entrance, or here you can see the entrance hall. On your right there's a long corridor leading to all the different studios of the students that are working there. Here there's a canteen, here there's a staircase. And here you can see the color scheme of the staircase with a blue plasnalo floor, which is a synthetic cast floor. And it was also continuing in the staircase, and gray walls in the staircase with these yellow doors. And on every floor level, there's again this long corridor, and on every floor it has a long linoleum colored floor with at the end a colored wall in a different color. So for example, here at the first floor you have a red linoleum floor, and then at the end a blue wall, almost directing you through the building. And for the floor plan, it almost can be seen as a dynamic composition on its own. And sometimes it can be linked, the floors can be linked to the function of the room. For example, these small squares, they are all rooms for the lecturers. But sometimes they are also, they have a gray floor or a yellow floor, for example. Maybe this was from the start, but it was not crucial that every floor had to be red. So the total composition was leading. And about colors for the interior, the former architect of the school, Sybren Valkema, said that this design was entirely left to Rietveld. He said, there have been no conflicts, although there have been discussions in which I feared for the worst. The colors of the linoleum, for instance, or that red or yellow wall, those were not our colors, but Rietveld's. We thought the gray was far too pronounced, too gray, too gloomy. We weren't so happy with it either, but it never came to a conflict. I should say, however, that he very deliberately used grey with the intention that everybody could do with it he wanted. In all these cases, Rietveld's vote was decisive. And it's very special nowadays because the academy is taken care of by the students and by the teachers. And most of the colors, like for example, these blue wall, are still there. And this care by the users is very important because the school, the academy does not have unlimited financial resources because there's just one amount of money for both education and maintenance. But on the other hand, the building is designed for the students and it is intensely used nowadays. So objects are dragged in and out and there's not a lot of space, so a lot of things are stored in the corridors nowadays, and students are working with a lot of different materials. And how students use the building over the years is also really beautifully seen every year at the graduation show. Like the artwork on the left, it was the floor was completely cleaned and everything was completely cleaned, and they removed every paint splatter from the floor just to that nothing distracted from just an audio installation and a drawing that was made on the columns. Some really fine drawings. And on the other hand, you can see here a student, another student is having this performance, and she throws chunks of clay against the wall, and afterwards it falls off, and then she throws the clay again and again. And then after each graduation show, all the students, they get this pot of paint, and they have to paint their own studio again. For example, this was then during the graduation show, and then afterwards the studio is painted, but you still see this pattern. And sometimes there's also some element extra painted as well, of course. But this can actually have a large effect. I mean, this is what happens when you not have the white architrave around the doors. And in fact, actually, Klim Meijer, so the designer of linoleum, he also wrote a book about color theory color in interiors, and he describes this effect itself. And he writes that the result is that the door on the right appears to be narrower and higher than the one next to it. So yeah, just to repaint just one little thing extra can actually have huge effects in the interior. And for the linoleum, well, the linoleum is not original anymore. So this is the situation when it was inaugurated, and this is nowadays. So in 2002, 2003, all the floors, they were replaced because, yeah, the linoleum was damaged. But also they wanted to have, there were other wishes in education, and they wanted to make the studios bigger. And then, of course, the floor needs to be, the colored floor planes needs to become bigger as well. So this dynamic, for example, these red dynamic squares, they are not in here. And next to this, around every 4 to 5 years, the collection of linoleum changes. There's a new collection. Sometimes designs are longer in a collection. Sometimes they are for a shorter period of, no, sometimes they are longer in a collection, but sometimes they already change after, they are already taken out after 4 or 5 years. And yeah, of course, there are many damages and sometimes small renovations in the building. And then what happens is that a new color from the factory is selected, for example, here, resulting in this patchwork of linoleum in some places of the building. And because of this fast continuing circulation of, again, use and maintenance, it was again necessary to go back to the original sources and to go back to the key principles of what this design actually was. So, and again, in the factory archive, it was possible to select the reference samples, and we see a quite similar palette, but all are now marmoleum, which is, of course, dirt is less easily visible on marmoleum. And here you can also see how the colors were offered to the architects, making these compositions by the factory, and also it was done in the paint industry as well. Colors were presented like this, so not in this, like nowadays, with all the same colors next to each other. And he selected from a collection that also had, for the first time, black and white linoleum in it, a quite dark gray and quite vivid red and a cool blue. And he combined this with a greenish yellow, a cool green, all not completely bright colors, but all together, again, forming this harmonious palette. And when comparing it actually to the paint colors, they were quite similar colors. And obviously there are more colors available by the paint industry. And he used also different colors from Pieterschoen and from Sikken, so from different companies, to adjust it to the linoleum designs, in which there was just a smaller collection of designs available. And nowadays, this is still the case. So during the renovation, they had to select colors from that were nowadays available, and luckily they were quite similar, but they are not the same. And next time, they have to consider it again and maybe reproduce one of the colors, especially for the school it can be, so to compensate this complete palette. And for now, the gray could be adjusted because it could be adjusted more easily because this is paint. So, and originally a really warm gray was used, but during maintenance, a much too green gray was actually used on the walls. And based on the reference samples, this gray was again carefully adjusted. And then another principle are the large colored planes that were so important in Rietveld's design. So a colored plane for one space, which is nowadays not possible anymore, because when there's reparation, you have to choose colors from the collection that is nowadays available. And for the studios, they were made larger, so it was necessary to make these large planes larger. It is justified, but you have to always be able to return to the original sources. But for these, for example, these disrupt these large planes. So it is really important that when you are installing a floor, that you keep aside some of the linoleum that you can use for repairs later on, so that you can keep these large planes. And then finally, during the same period of the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, Rietveld also was commissioned to do another building in Arnheim, another art school. And it was built as a variation to the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, and it was completed in 1963. So Rietveld was still living when this academy was inaugurated, but nowadays it's a completely different building, because it's really well climatized, because the facade is insulated, and it is very neat and clean because the students are much more restricted, and then it looks like this, completely different. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank für diese leidenschaftliche, gut gelaunte Vortragsweise. Es macht total Spaß, euch zuzuhören. Und was mich immer so glücklich macht, ist, wenn Denkmalpflege gestalterisch ist. When there is some design in the heritage, in the occupying of the heritage. So I really like that. Thank you. Are there any questions? Auch auf Deutsch natürlich.
Es würde mich wundern, inwiefern es die Möglichkeit gäbe, bei diesen Linoleum-Geschichten die Glanzgrade mit dem Finish zu beeinflussen, durch die Behandlung.
Translate maybe.
Is it how can you change how can you maintain the color, the
gloss degree,
the glossness, or get it
or influence it?
Yeah, well, it is possible to produce. It is possible to produce linoleum with a different gloss, and it was actually that the marmoleum, the historic marmoleum, also from the press room and also from the Rietveld Academy, they both had a glossiness that is quite comparable to the glossiness of the coating that is nowadays produced. Originally, they always apply this wax coating on top, but there's also a new coating available that is much more resistant and has this same glossiness. So for the marmoleum samples, it's quite easy. But for the Walton, so the monochrome of the press room, it's a bit harder. But then, yeah, you have to discuss this with the factory, and maybe they can also think along to make the coating less glossy. Yeah.
Vielleicht ist es noch gut zu sagen, dass die Presseraum, die Möbel sind jetzt alles bei Denkmalschutz, und wir versuchen einen Raum zu finden im Museum und etwas anderes, dass es wieder neu aufgestellt wird, weil es ist wirklich ein Gesamtraum, ein Kunstwerk und nur die Möbel, ja, das ist nur ein Teil. Und deshalb war es auch so wichtig zu sehen, ob die Fußboden wieder hergestellt sein könnte. Leider geht das nicht mehr in Frankreich, in Paris, weil das Raum ist völlig geändert. Aber es ist ein bisschen traurig, dass diese Architektur völlig zerstört ist, weil es war ein Geschenk von den Niederlanden zu UNESCO und merkwürdigerweise das Rietvelds Schröderhaus ist ein UNESCO-Monument, aber hier im die Hauptsitz ist es völlig zerstört von UNESCO. Merkwürdig. Aber das wollten wir noch gerne erzählen. Aber sie hatte eine Frage, Entschuldigung.
Well, my question is now answered because I wanted to ask you how about this room, this conference room? Is this, because you did this 3D project and 3D model, and I was going to ask if this is going to be restored somehow or if this is going to leave again. What is the, exactly. Yeah. The question is answered now, so thank you.
Ja.
An den Wänden von diesem Pressraum da war doch auch ein spezielles Material. Ich habe nicht verstanden, was es war.
Special material. Can you tell some?
Yeah, in the press room, yeah. It is Suvida. So this was a material back then, but you have comparable things available right now. So it is vinyl. Vinyl on top of canvas backing.
Aber ist das verfügbar heute? Also wenn ihr es rekonstruiert, kriegt ihr das? Habt ihr auch so das schon erforscht? Oder
Is it still available, this material?
Yes, it is still available, but not exactly the same. So there are still companies who are producing vinyl wall coverings. But exactly this color, that would be another project to see if this is still possible to do that. There was one student also from conservation and restoration who was doing also research into this material as well, the Nisia van Walen.
Yes. Es ist sehr interessant, oder, dass die Denkmalpflege, sobald es um Objekte der Nachkriegszeit geht, sich mit der Industrie auseinandersetzen muss und kann und darf. Und das finde ich total spannend. Das ist wie so ein Systemwechsel, der offensichtlich auch die Denkmalpflege in Bewegung bringt.
Ja.
Und die Industrie.
Ja.
Und die Industrie.
Stimmt.
And maybe it's also nice to tell that, or not so nice actually, that there are still remains at UNESCO, but first nobody knew where the press room was located. So when I visited UNESCO, I asked people like, "Where do you know where it is?" And nobody knew. And then I came back, and there was for the archive, and there was an old employee of the press room visiting exactly that day. So he pointed where the old entrance of the press room had been, and it was just like this space, like this. With the staircase and then ending into a wall. That's it. That's what's left, and the rest is just raised floors and not recognizable anymore. But still the linoleum backing, so the burlap backing of linoleum was still a little bit on the floor, and there was even hanging this Suvida wall covering, because it was a space that nobody used it, and it was just leading to a wall and then a door with electricity, so it was not important. But yeah, still the remains of the press room were there. And later, because linoleum is quite hard to remove, it's quite fixed to the floor, so we suspected that maybe the linoleum was still under this raised floor, and then later on people from the RCE, someone from the RCE, she went back to check if the linoleum was still there, and it was. So there are remains still under this raised floor. Okay. Yeah.
restoring and conserving cultural sites worldwide don't take care of their own building.
That's right.
I think it's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
It's a pity.
Yeah. Yeah, we also went there to ask for more archival material because people, they had worked there. So there was this old former employee organization of UNESCO, former employees of UNESCO, and they have this a series of presentations. So we also gave their presentation about the press room and if they had some material left, and then people became aware of what was originally there. Yeah, yeah. It was, yeah, it's of course a bit strange. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But all the archive of the factories, it's very important because, you know, like the color fan or the books, they are pieces of art themselves, I could say, because it's not, the colors are arranged in a very special way. And for example, there's a lot of attention for gray and for the colors. And the color fan itself is an inspiration, how to use different colors with each other. And for the older ones among us, it's so interesting to really recognize the colors because you remember them somehow. But there is no much attention for that. Formerly, the former workers, they take care of the old material, or sometimes somebody like Mariël, she really takes care of the archive. But we need more attention from the factories, indeed, because it's heritage as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe I can also explain a little bit about why probably this room was taken out of UNESCO, because it was quite a clear grid. So after after a while, the press needed to make some changes in the room, and it was almost not possible because you have this clear grid you have to work with. And that was apparently the death of the room. Yeah, but now maybe it becomes alive again.
Yeah.
Nochmals vielen Dank für diesen leidenschaftlichen Einblick in eure Arbeit. Und wie ich unsere Freunde von der Baumuster-Zentrale kenne, gibt es jetzt einen fulminanten Apéro, zu dem Sie herzlich eingeladen sind. Ich wünsche allen noch einen ganz schönen Abend. Vielen Dank.